Okay. All right. I'm sure people will trickle in, but I might get started just so we can stay on time and not fall behind. For those of you who don't know me, well, first, welcome to another postgrad TASA Thursday. This is our second one for the year. My name's Caitlin, and I am a member of the postgrad committee for TASA, and I'll be facilitating today's session. This is my first TASA panel that I've hosted, so I'm very excited. And there's a few other members of the postgrad committee here as well in the background. But before we go any further, I just want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional owners and custodians of the land from where I'm speaking from today. And I also pay my respect to their elders, past and present. I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, especially if you're joining us here today. And we acknowledge their living connection to country, their relationship with the land, and all living things, extending back tens of thousands of years. Today's panel we've planned for is really exciting and something that I was really interested in. We're going to have a panel discussion with two very impressive researchers who I'll introduce shortly. And then we'll have a bit of an open Q&A to follow that as well. But throughout the session, you can also pop any questions or comments you have in the chat, and we can discuss them as we move through the session as well. And today's discussion we've titled Breaking Your Research Out of the Academic Bubble. And really the focus of the panel today is going to be on other ways to kind of disseminate research findings and have impact out of, I guess, more traditional academic spheres. And we know that research really needs to get to the people who would benefit from reading it and using it. And with the rise of digital media and the changing scape of how we can share that research, we thought it was a really crucial time to be talking about this today. And especially, I guess, for early career researchers and all of us in general as well, thinking about the impact of your research from, grant application writing and funding considerations, and how to best demonstrate reach and impact was something we wanted to kind of talk about as well. But to help facilitate this conversation, we have two great panelists. So I'll introduce them very briefly, and then I'll hand to them and they can tell you a bit more about what they do. But firstly, we have Dr. Ellen Cho, who is a sociologist and completed her PhD in 2022. She is a lecturer at the School of Languages, Literatures, Cultures and Linguistics, and a lead researcher at the Monash Gender and Family Violence Prevention Centre, both at Monash Uni. And her two main areas of research expertise are domestic and family violence and the Korean diaspora. And next we have Dr. Belle Laney. But Belle is an ARC-funded postdoctoral researcher with the Research Centre for Public Health, Equity and Human Flourishing at Torrens University. She explores how social class structures women's health-related decision-making and alcohol consumption behaviours, and with a big focus on trust in risk information. And so a very warm welcome to our panelists. And to start with, I might throw first to Ellen, and she can give a bit more of an overview of her background and I guess the main thoughts and considerations you had for when you thought about this panel and coming along today.
Thank you. I thank you for very kind introduction, and I would also like to begin by paying my respect to their elders and past and present. I'm Ellen. I'm a sociologist by training, and but then I moved from social sciences to area studies, which I'm based at now, and I can see my colleague Yuri from Japanese studies, which is very exciting. So when I first got an email from Mavis, I was like, yay, this is really exciting because right now I'm writing like 3 different grant application, and I was kind of rejecting all the panelist requests. But I was like, this one I'm doing because it's really close to my heart. Public scholarship means really a lot to me, and I actually learned a lot from really breaking the academic bubble and putting my research out there in practice. So this is really exciting, and thanks for having me.
Awesome. Belle, did you want to give a quick little extension on my introduction.
Caitlin, I thought you did a great job introducing me, so I don't think I can exceed that in any way. I am absolutely also looking forward to the discussion and see it as entirely relevant. I have prepared some answers to the questions that you put to me, so I'll save my talking for those.
Perfect. Well, I'd better just jump into that then. We'll just go forward, and I'm really excited to hear more about both of your experiences and any tidbits of advice and takeaways we can come up with today as well. But first up, well, Belle, what I might start with you. What do you think have been the biggest benefits, or I guess the biggest noticeable outcomes that come to mind for you, and when you've stepped out of that bubble, and maybe some, drawing on some of your experiences there and what you've come to? Yeah,
Caitlin, thank you. And thanks everyone for who is here today, and certainly people who might be listening to this later. It's great to have a sense of collegiality around some of these topics. So there's three, when you asked me this question, I kind of thought, well, there's three biggest things actually. And the first biggest thing fundamentally is that stepping outside of the traditional academic pathway, be it about consumer engagement or co-designing a research translation outcome, fundamentally is about adhering to the grant funding requirements. So Cat 1 and Q1 journals also require that we've engaged with consumers in our scholarship now. And so my discipline area is in public health sociology, and we're looking at in a very applied form of social science, which is looking to understand women's reasons for consuming alcohol relative to their perceptions of breast cancer risk, with the view of redesigning risk messaging that suits needs for equity in cancer prevention. So as Caitlin said, we're looking at audience segmentation by social class. So when we're applying for research funding, and I have recently been successful in some Cat 1 funding, there is an expectation for consumer engagement. It goes beyond dissemination to translation for us. So, and I know that people here will be representing different disciplinary areas, and things might be different for your specific field, but certainly in public health, it's really become now a dead end in our discipline to stop at dissemination. Funders want advocacy, they want impact on policy, they want a sense of the impact on practice change, be it informing a guideline. So this needs stepping out of academia. And so overall, that is the biggest benefit. But it's also about better research. And so part of that is about proving the quality of the research and demonstrate, a pillar of quality is the participant voice. And so when we step outside of traditional academia, that's kind of where you get that raw participant voice, that deeper understanding. And from a social sciences perspective, I've got an ongoing lifelong scholarly fandom and obsession with Pierre Bourdieu, who talked about this as participant objectivation. And it's really about stepping outside of the academic discipline to kind of turn the telescope back onto the discipline itself, and to critique the notion of expert knowledge, that we as academics still have this narcissistic viewpoint that we have a superior conceptualization of how the world works, and of the subjects of our research, their experiences. So for me, I suppose epistemologically, I've got that that's a big benefit for me, stepping outside of the academic bubble. And the last one is fundamentally really about adhering to this idea of the civic society and doing research in a way that is right and good, promoting the interests of the community. And I suppose part of that is a bit of a lovely thing to move away from this narcissistic academic kind of sitting in our ivory tower, generating information and doing nothing with it, and rather trying to have impact, be it at in terms of the Australian Research Council and the NHMRC funding bodies, it's about knowledge impact or social impact and policy impact. And we're trying to cut across all of those different layers of impact. But, you know, so it really is about almost a bit of a service to the community rather than just increasing your H index. Thank you, Caitlin.
No, that's great. I think the academic bubble analogy was great. I love the ivory tower as well. That seems like another apt way to think about it. Ellen, did you want to talk a bit about your experience and like general kind of considerations as well?
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree with Belle. It's more about, you know, putting our participants' voices out there. So I think I should tell you a little bit about what I did with my research. So one of my PhD chapters, so I focused on domestic and family violence victim survivors. And one of what I did was I turned one of the chapters into 3-part video series. So that was translated in Korean, Chinese, and English. So it was a really fun project. I got to work with a lot of different creative artists. Mainly, you know, film directors, videographers, actors, and singers, which was really, really enjoyable during the COVID. Obviously, we had a lot of challenges because we couldn't book a venue. We had to had a lot of, you know, COVID restrictions, but it was a really fun project. But I think the biggest benefit was really to connect with the community, because since 2022, I think, I might be wrong, I don't know whether they are still using this video series, but it was used in the Chinese and Korean community as a training materials. So I feel like, you know, like when, I don't know if you had the same thoughts, Belle, when I did my PhD, I was like, my participants, I know they are good at English and everything, but, you know, coming from migrants background, they might not have that access to my work, my thesis or peer review journal articles, because they were not like open access. So it was really good to do that kind of creative arts work, so it can be used and it can be more accessible to a broader audience. Yeah, so that's what I did.
Wow. Is that something that you were approached to do, or something you come up with yourself in terms of idea? Or
it was really that's a really good question, because I have a friend who's Malaysian New Zealander. We were just having a chat about my PhD, and I was like, you know, I'm not sure whether, you know, these women share their stories with me to make things better, and I'm not sure how to actually connect to the community or give a wider impact on the society. And he was like, why don't we just put it as a video series? I'm happy to do that for you. And yeah, that's how we got started. So it was really like, you know, I wasn't obviously thinking about my academic career or anything, publications, Q1 journal or anything like that, but we just thought that it would be a really good project to do together.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, I've never thought of having that be something as an outcome for a thesis in terms of, you know, a video series, and it's such a cool idea, and I think something that you could use in a lot of different areas. So how to apply, yeah. Wow. Okay. I think one of the topics, and this is something that I selfishly have a bit of an interest in, so I've put this question. Oh, Belle, you've got a question. Sorry, I see your hand.
Sorry.
No.
You know, in the interest of making this dialogue really dynamic and fluid, just to chime in, Ellen, I think that's what you've achieved there is excellent, and it prompts me to remember that one of the other biggest joys and also benefits of stepping outside the academic bubble is to remove the barriers to access to our information. And it just prompts me to remember, Ellen, yes, you're right. So our research is focused around equity and from a social class angle. And so one of the key barriers is access to literacy and access for women who are living in poverty and unable to afford to access news articles or information generally. So one of the strategies we had used was to pair up with the Women in Poverty Network, and we were using them as a way to broker information through the network. So, I think about the conversation a lot, and I'm not convinced whatsoever that that's not an academic resource. I think it's just mostly read by academics. So it's just a bit of a self-fulfilling kind of, mode of dissemination. But nevertheless, though some articles that we'd written in that were brokered out through the channel of the Women in Poverty Network, and some of it was synthesized in a different way, in a way that perhaps was more accessible. So I do think that that's really important for us if we're going to be fulfilling this notion of breaking out of the bubble. Sorry, Caitlin. No,
that's a good point. Almost how far the bubble reaches that you have to break through around you. I think for me, and things like the conversation come into this, but one of the things that I was really interested in was the kind of rise of researchers using social media and I see it as very kind of quick fire ways of getting research out, and whether that's through, super short 15 second, 1 minute videos, or through articles where you kind of need to distill down lots of information. Because I don't know, for me at least, I know trying to write a journal article, I struggle to cut down the journal article sometimes. So then saying, I want you to explain your research and your results all in 800 words and have it be accessible is quite a daunting task that we want to do well. But I suppose as the world becomes more digital and more quick fire and quick turnaround, that's probably something that I really think about from a research standpoint. And I was interested to kind of hear your opinions on it and any thoughts you have around that. So maybe Ellen, if you want to start this time.
It's funny because I'm not a big fan of social media, but then again, I kind of use media platforms to really promote my work and research. So it's really interesting. I really had to learn to use Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, which is kind of becoming a really important resources to put your work out there. I think I feel more comfortable right now, but when I was a PhD student, I was like, I don't know if anyone's going to be interested in my work. I don't know if you have that kind of self-doubt. Are we all postgraduate students here? Yeah, okay.
I think it's mostly postgrads, but it's probably a mix of TASA affiliates, I suppose.
But great. So I'd love to hear about what your thoughts on this, Belle. But I was like, going through the job application process, I noticed that they were asking for our Twitter handles and LinkedIn handles, and I was like, wow, I don't have anything on it. So it's really, Bill, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we're sort of slaves to social media as academics, but, and I'm often, to be honest, I feel utterly stunned when I go to search for an academic and can't see that they've got a Google Scholar account. I can't see them on Twitter. I have no Twitter handle, and I find that mind blowing. How are you not, how are you proving the reach of your research? What are you grabbing at in terms of proving impact? What other ways have we got access to? I feel a bit gross about the whole Twitter thing, especially because it's now X, and this sort of late capitalist system that we're operating in and perpetuating by participating in this. But I can't see what other way we as academics can demonstrate impact in grants at a social level. How can we kind of, I suppose if we think about altmetrics and we bring it back to first principles, it's really about where content, our scholarly content appears online. And then it is, I think, I could be wrong, I'd be interested if people know, whether it is the only way that we have this quantitative measure of engagement with that content. And that's what we are using in grant applications to substantiate the impact we're having. if people know of another way, please, I'd love you to let me know. But I mean, we can discover the field weighted citation indexes on our papers. We know how many citations they've had. We know what sources have cited it, but that's all within that academic bubble. And so for me, I think the answer is, yeah, I have relied on Twitter. When I've backed off of it, I've regretted it. It has been proven in studies to increase your citations. It's also, I must admit, it's also where I go to keep my finger on the pulse. There's been nights where I've been scrolling through Twitter and been really glad that I did, because I've come across, opportunities to make submissions to consultation plans, government, which affect our research. I have found out what other people are working on. I've come across different academics I didn't know about previously. I think there's a whole range of benefits of Twitter, but whether or not I think that whether or not I like it, it's a different thing. I'm just sort of participating in this cog.
Yeah, I think the social media game also just, I'm trying to think how to put it. I think what you're saying there, I kind of think of the need to kind of stay on the pulse, and it almost becomes, not never ending, but a little bit never ending. And I think that's something like when I first got into my PhD, I'd never used Twitter. I don't know if that's just, I don't know, I just didn't use Twitter. And then as I got into it, I'm like, oh, this actually is something that I didn't know about, like academia and academic Twitter is a thing. And I suppose even then I wonder how much the broader public is in terms of Twitter, because Twitter even in itself is quite segmented. Like there's book Twitter, there's all these different kind of aspects of Twitter in your own little chamber where everything is. Look,
I think you're right, Caitlin, and mostly I see Twitter as for academics, I see LinkedIn as business professionals, and Facebook for participants potentially in a particular demographic now, because there's been shifts there. And people are talking about it as a news source, Facebook as a news source. I still think, I agree with you, I think that there's segmentation that's occurring across these, but fundamentally, how do you show in your grant applications that your research, the impact that your research has had in terms of at a policy level even, what other sources provide that data? And I think that's, if we were to be encouraging a shift in academia, then, and creating our own, like a democratic way to disperse this information. But in the absence of that, I think we are ultimately just slaves to Twitter. Yeah.
So as someone who, I've not done a grant application, I've not done any kind of funding application, is that something that you would directly kind of reference in terms of, like, are you referencing retweets on articles? Are you citing your views on certain things? Like how is that coming through in terms of how you apply that then to your funding and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you are talking about the number, who it's been retweeted by, and how many followers they have. And, so for example, in the work we do, the Public Health Association of Australia might retweet our work. We're interested in how many members are part of that organisation, how many followers do they have as well, who then has retweeted it, what source do they represent. That's just Twitter. If it's a news source, we're interested in how many people subscribe to the source, how many, and really, like, it's pretty hazy. It doesn't necessarily show engagement. It might just be a click. We all know that there's clickbait stories however, there is, it's quite nuanced now where they can track how long somebody spent on an article.
Yeah.
So if they're on the page for 2 minutes, it's likely they probably have read it. It has been, hasn't it, Anne? I agree. And I think that somebody is behind these pages doing a really good job at churning the information out, or they're doing a not so good job. And I think, Melissa Sweet, for example, from Croaky Health, from Croaky News, is constantly pumping out really valuable information through the Twitter feed and tagging relevant people or relevant academics. So those, you can make reference to those kinds of, if you're making a claim in a grant application for having had knowledge impact from your research, these are important pieces of information, quantitative data that
Yeah.
you can use to substantiate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like another form, like another literacy you kind of have to have under your belt to navigate what your presence is doing and where and how and in what way and how many, you know, how many sites, how many tweets, how many retweets, all that kind of stuff. You've both in different ways had your research kind of break out of the bubble, I guess. What would you say are the biggest challenges to that, or the barriers you faced, or if you were to kind of say to someone who hasn't done it yet, look, I wish I'd known this, like, do you have any big takeaways that you think would be worth telling someone on the cusp of this, you know, being in that position, I suppose, for grant funding and things like that? Oh, sorry. Belle, you go. Sorry.
That's okay. I feel like I've done too much talking. So sorry, Ellen, I'll try to keep this bit brief. The biggest challenge fundamentally is time. It takes a lot of time to engage consumers. It takes time to do media. So just to give a flavour of the kinds of media I've done, we found out women didn't necessarily know that alcohol increases their risk of breast cancer. So the first point was we did a huge spearheaded a media campaign just to share that knowledge. And so I did heaps of media, including long talk back, and that was really nice because you get a chance to gauge how your scholarly work is being received by the taxpayer, and that's, I think, fundamentally what we should be aiming to achieve. And so talk back takes time. You've got to be kind of at the mercy of the media. So time, you know, it's doing drive-by radio, it's doing, you know, I did a Life Matters segment with Hillary Harper, which took a lot of time, a huge benefit, but it really did, it's not creating academic publications that increase your H index. It's not doing anything in academia, but and it does take a lot of time, and it benefits your scholarly work, but it's still currently, there's a bit of a lag. It's not necessarily recognized in academia. I did make mention of the ways that you can talk about substantiating impact, but fundamentally it doesn't show in your metrics. So you're kind of doing two things running simultaneously. I don't know if that's your experience, Ellen, but you know, and a lot of it is about being open to hearing, you know, consumer engagement is truly about handing the reins over to the consumer and letting them drive the direction of the research study from the outset right through to the translational stage. And that's not a smash and grab. You know, I've been really interested in understanding this from the kind of a radical care perspective that, you know, it really is part of breaking out of the academic bubble really does mean that you are investing in other people and kind of at their mercy, you know, like following the leads that they take you in. And if that takes 2 hours for one conversation that you really ultimately as an academic in your workday want it to take 15 minutes, that doesn't show on your CV, you know? So I think I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that, Ellen.
I totally agree with you, Belle. It's just it's not recognized as traditional research output by the university. I'm not sure about other university, but at least at Monash. So that's one of the biggest challenge because you put so much time into it, so much effort into it, and you work with lots of different people on this, but it's not really recognized as a traditional publication research output. And when I was putting this as a video series, the biggest issue for me was going through the ethics application again, because now that it became, you know, a video, like a visual material rather than a text. So that was one of the biggest challenge. I mean, you know, good problem to have, but it took a bit of time to actually convince the ethics committee and make sure that we don't break the privacy of our participants and things like that. So that was one of the practical challenges that I had. I guess my biggest fear, not really barriers or challenges, but my biggest fear was that, you know, my work would probably stereotype or overrepresent the Korean community. So what we did was to what we did to avoid this was our team invited 12 Korean sector workers and community members, as well as victim survivors from the Korean community, to come and preview the video series before it gets out in the world. So that's what we did. And that again took another a month or 2 months to get that organized. We tried to incorporate as much feedback as possible, and they were very happy about the outcomes. But yeah, it was just so much work, and just the uncertainty that, you know, whether I'm really representing this community in the right way, in a respectful way. That was my biggest fear.
Did you oh, sorry, Belle, you go.
No, sorry, Caitlin, just Ellen, I think what you've raised is so important. The challenge then of how do we measure whether the impact for the community, I mean, you're saying, you know, had their feedback that they really liked it, but, you know, how is that kind of measurable? Is still kind of hanging in the breeze, is swaying around, isn't it? You know, without any kind of tangible grip. You know, I know there is I'm part of a working group anyway that's writing a response to the consumer engagement strategy that's been put forward by the government at the moment. And that's one of the things that academics are wanting, is kind of like a toolkit. Tell us how we can actually measure that we've broken out of the bubble and we've had some kind of impact that is positive. And then what do we do with the information? Leave the end user and continuing writing our papers.
I think as well that I really find kind of Instagram and TikTok and resharing and the way it's almost like a contagion with knowledge, like something gets picked up and within a couple of hours it's everywhere and everyone's had all these different takes on it, and they've either referenced what they're talking about or stitched what they're talking about to then give their own opinion. And I think that's almost like the other end of breaking it out of the bubble, is that it almost breaks it out of your not your control, but I guess what I'm trying to say is when you're kind of writing your journal articles, you can track who is citing you, you can keep a pretty good tangle. And I guess once you break out of that bubble and it's out in the public, there is it will take off in some, well, hopefully it will take off in some ways, but I guess that letting go of it and the control over what you're sharing at a point as well. Yeah.
I think invariably you're going to have outcomes when you go out and engage with the mainstream media. You're going to have outcomes that make you cringe. And I can grab out multiple of them. One in particular was an interview I did on FM radio that was trying to raise awareness of the structural and gendered aspects of the reasons why women consume alcohol, and that, you know, we're at risk of blaming and shaming here, and we should be shifting to focusing on these, determinants of health, social determinants. And I thought the interviewer was on the same page. And at the very end, there was this remark that undid the whole interview. And it was sort of like, well, tonight when I go off and have a drink, I'll think about and cheers to those women who are doing it hard. And, I sort of thought that's kind of not really what I was going for. So I think that's, those takeaway points there, they again remind you that as academics, we have we are operating on a whole different conceptual level than I think we can anticipate our end user to think about. And when I think about one of the greatest benefits, often we're woken up to the way that the general public might think about some of the topics we're so engrossed in. And that can be a huge benefit to shaping our next research project. So it works both ways, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, definitely. I know I have only written one conversation article, but it was on housework. And I remember before I wrote it, I did some research on other housework articles. And it was two kind of camps. And I know that in kind of more broader streams, I always say, don't read comments, like just don't read comments on things. And I remember looking up housework articles and there were all these comments, I think mostly from men, from their profile, but saying, oh my gosh, why are we still talking about housework? Why are we still talking about this? This is old news. But then on other ones, there was a lot of, I guess, women saying, oh my gosh, you've just put into words like how much I think about this and this is what I'm talking about. And so even that is an example of the different reactions you can get from different people. And I guess knowing the broader research, housework is still really something that we've spent 50 or so years looking at, and we still don't really know the answers to why things aren't working. And so it was just a really eye-opening experience, as you said, to how people are going to engage and react to even the premise of what you're putting out there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, you know, part of it is sort of semantics. It's an issue of our academic understanding of what a word means, and means to us theoretically and conceptually, is quite different. So building on what you're saying, Caitlin, your notion of housework is about labor. You know, it's about low cognitive labor and loads, which is a very different term, and has a very different meaning to what people think of and grab at when they think of housework. But, you know, and our studies of, you know, we wrote an article at one point about happiness and fulfillment, you know, and these sort of deep-seated ideas about what a good life is, how it's conceptualized. That was our angle. And, you know, one of the readers was sort of coming in at it saying, yeah, but people who are living in poverty can be happy too. You're making the divide worse. You're telling us that, you know, our version of life isn't happy. And I thought, oh, that's just, you know, but it really valuable all the same. You know? So I think, yeah, a lot of it is about, a lot of that challenge is kind of almost on that kind of spectrum, hazy spectrum between free will, human agents, you know, full agency and structures and, you know, deterministic type approaches. And somewhere in the middle is actually what the general public is feeling and thinking, you know.
Yeah.
So it's not we conceptualize as academics, sociologists. Yeah.
The overthinking of words, I think I can definitely identify with that, going, okay, but like we can't say that exact thing because that's not what I'm talking about, and really putting a lot of premise on the way you're communicating your messages, where people might not be thinking as deeply about what you're saying.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there, I guess, is there any advice you would give to any other bits of advice that you'd want to add in for especially early career researchers that are considering this, you know, this time in their career where this is, I think, only going to be more and more prominent as well in the world we live in, that this isn't, it's, if anything, is going to be more intense as we go on. Is there any advice you wish you kind of had before you embarked on this, or anything you'd like to share, Ellen?
Well, from my own experience, I was advised to focus on my traditional research publication outcomes during my PhD. So I was getting comments like, what is she doing? Why is she working on that kind of project? So I was a bit unsure about whether I was doing the right thing or whether I was on the right track, but I think I was on the right track now looking back. But I just wanted to mention this to you all. Universities, at least at Monash now, universities are increasingly recognizing non-traditional research outputs as well. So I think there are 3 rounds for application for non-research outcomes at Monash. I haven't actually put mine in yet, but if you want to know more about this, you might want to speak to your supervisors to understand what's recognized as non-traditional research outputs. What I heard is it's a fair bit of work. You will need to justify why this should be recognized as research outputs. There's a lot of paperwork and everything, but I think it's worth trying. And also, you know, through this kind of, you know, non-traditional research activities, you really get a sense of accomplishments, and also you can get your message across different disciplines and industries. I really liked working with creative artists. That was something like, you know, it was really wonderful. Like, you know, if I, you know, tell them a little bit about my data, you know, obviously de-identified data, they just came back with dance, music, and it was so fulfilling. And, you know, I was telling my friends, you know, I feel like I'm working with the real people, like a real people in the world. It was just so amazing. And we got to support creative artists from migrant and refugee backgrounds, because all of our cast were either Korean, Cambodian, Japanese, Australian, Cambodia and Australia, we just had all different cast actors and singers from different cultural background, which was really good because they were really struggling during the COVID. They were not getting jobs in their acting or singing jobs, so it was really good that we could actually bring them together and do something together. And also, we had to apply for a grant application. We failed 3 applications, but we got 1 from Creative Victoria, which was really good. So I, as an early career researcher, I got to understand how the grant application system works. We were shortlisted for their interviews and things like that. So it was really good. Like, it was really a rich experience that I got as a PhD student. And so I would just say, just do it. If that's what you want.
I think that's great advice, Ellen. And I think, the point that I would latch on to there is you do it because it's enjoyable and because it's, again, part of that civic society. It's the right and good thing to do in life generally. But in terms of if you're envisaging beyond the HDR stage into a postdoc and you want to find research funding for that, which is mostly what people want to do, I would suggest familiarizing with what schemes are available for funding and understanding what the criteria are for fulfilling and for winning a grant. And so one of the key criteria is forms of leadership. And so you can be creative and clever with the way that you build in examples of what leadership looks like in your particular field. And one form of leadership might be sitting on the executive committee of a non-government organization that is a community group that is within your research area. That's certainly what I do. And to be aware that a lot of the schemes now are partnering with industry. So if I had my time again as a PhD, I would have volunteered much more to do talks to industry groups or and you look, it's such a lonely process sitting on a webinar. I did one yesterday. I was telling Ellen and Caitlin about it earlier, where you can't see who you're speaking to, and for 40 minutes you're just sort of hammering on about your research and hoping they're kind of getting it. But it was a really valuable experience because at the end they gave me all these kind of asked questions and gave me feedback. And so this was a forum with alcohol and drug workers as their professional development. They tune into these webinars. So that for me was deeply valuable, and it's something I can directly write about and in a grant application. So yeah, I think that getting much more involved in industry level stuff is what I would do again if I had my time over. But anyway, you can catch up in a postdoc if you haven't.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway from me for that is the idea. I think there is a risk with academia and I guess working where you're like, okay, well, I'm sociology. I'm just that's where I'm going to be researching and posting and submitting. And then I hear Ellen say that she's got a grant from Creative Victoria for her project and talking about, talking to industry bodies and things. And it's just a good reminder to keep the blinkers off for, the other stuff available as well. And Anne's just mentioned in the chat, like sports sociologists with their own community radio shows in Adelaide. So just another way of, having a different take on it, I suppose.
Yeah, I used to work with Sam actually, Anne, and yeah, and I know Ben Hook really well from personally. So I agree. I think there's heaps of scope for academics to touch back into the real world.
Yeah, make it less of a bubble and just expanding and having it be a bit less separate. We've got about 15 minutes of time left. I might just open it up if anyone did have questions. That's my main questions I had for the panel. But if anyone had any comments or anything that they wanted to expand on or take the opportunity to ask about while we're all here. No, maybe. No. Oh, Natalie.
Thank you, both of you, for kind of sharing your experiences thus far. I suppose I'm interested in thinking about accountability in academia. I think that obviously there's been a huge turn in terms of who academics are accountable to. And often when we're researching with research participants, we're kind of in a lot of ways, because of institutional kind of approaches, forgetting about who we're accountable to in our research. And so I'm wondering whether you have any suggestions about how academics can contribute to a conversation around change in that space, and about how we can, I suppose, educate institutions and kind of the broader context around who funds the research about, well, yes, we've received money to do this research, and yes, of course, we're accountable to how we spend that money and what we do with it and what comes of it, but to also teach those spaces about that's not the only area that we're accountable to, and it may not be measurable, but that it's important that we capture that in some way. And that, so just kind of thinking about that and what your suggestions might be, if you do have any, or you've experienced that.
Yeah, Natalie, I think that's a really important point to raise. And one of the word authenticity also crossed my mind when I was sort of thinking about coming on and speaking here today. But I think change is afoot, because the work that I'm involved in with Health Translation SA is trying to bring that scope into the ways that grant timeframes are assessed. What can we actually expect? What is realistic? If we're going to engage with consumers, and we want to ask consumers to be, truly involved in the research process, including writing academic papers with us, then we need to be realistic in how long that might take. Part of the, that idea of accountability is about making sure that our expectations of what a consumer involvement is and what their expectations are of being involved in a research project are on the same page. And I think that what you've kind of raised touches on what I think I was trying to get at, with saying that a lot of my concern is about over-promising at the moment, in terms of research. We're saying that this has a implication for the end user, but then what are we really doing with what they tell us they want after that point in time, when we've got to move on to the next project or the next funding application? So I think somewhere along the line, there's, this notion of accountability does need to be revisited. But I do think that it is under consideration by the people who are, informing schemes. Like in my field, it's the Medical Research Fund, it's the NHMRC, the Australian Research Council. There is a dialogue going on. So, I think we need to be patient, obviously, but we also can be encouraged by that. Is that sort of what you meant by accountability, though?
And I suppose just, contributing to the education of institutions and funding organizations about the various forms of accountability, and that as researchers, we're accountable to our participants and also the groups and societies that we're researching on behalf of. And that how do we teach institutions about that? And I suppose, it sounds quite radical thinking about it, but it is something that if, I guess, we're not contributing to that conversation, we're going to continue to see these forms of accountability that aren't actually measuring true and meaningful impact. And I suppose just, I guess, as early career researchers or postgraduates, that's kind of a space that we're inevitably going to be part of, that seems to be expanding at a rate that feels almost out of control. And so kind of how to contribute to putting a pause to that and scaling that back, and really thinking about, well, numbers are one thing, but inevitably our research is much more than that. And how do we change those processes and practices at a ground level?
But, and we can engage, that's where I think it is important to have a voice on the at a governance level, to sit on a research committee and have a say about what this actually takes in real world conditions, and what do we rightfully owe research participants, but also having a say on key strategy documents that fundamentally govern our funding schemes, and saying to them, you know, that example of the kinds of things we're writing in our submission to the consumer engagement strategy is, if we're going to have a toolkit, one of the considerations is we've got this notion of honoraria for research participants, that we need to reimburse them for participating in our research. But for our topic, we're at risk of upsetting their access to welfare if we're paying them, you know, but we're bound by the structures of the university in that respect. You know, we have to just give them their $50 FPOS card when they participate in a 2-day workshop, you know, whether or not that actually meets their needs or not, you know. So I think there is scope for us to have a say, but it takes extra time. And that's what I think one of my key points is, what is the challenge? It's time. And when it kind of boils down to it, if you've got a Q1 paper to write for a journal, you've got a journal article to write for a Q1 publication, then it's, you know, how do you divide your time? And it's having your institution recognize how you're dividing your time as well, particularly if you're in a salaried position. So I think all of the things that you're saying are right, but I think they are truly on the boiler, and unless people make submissions to these kinds of documents, because we're invited to, and that, you know, rolls back around to that notion of what is the value of Twitter. It's about knowing that these opportunities are, you know, and there's your say.gov, I think, that has a listing of different ways that we can have a say on key documents that affect our practice as academics. Yeah, I think it's an important dialogue though, Natalie. And the other thought I had was writing, you know, as academics, we write a methodological paper about this, you know, share with the academic community that it's like that old adage of don't raise a problem without a solution. You know, you have to, you know, that's kind of, you know, you wouldn't go to your boss or your parent with a problem without offering them a way to solve it. I think that's probably what we need to start doing.
Ellen, did you have anything to add?
Just adding to Belle's point, we, in the center that I was in, Monash Gender and Family Violence Center, we had a lot of discussion about this. We're always like, you know, obviously as a sociologist, you see a lot of fundings in the family violence space. There is a lot of research. There are a lot of research going on, but what we were saying was, you know, we've done enough talking now. We need to see more actions, and we need to really think about how to engage with victim survivors. So for the video series that I did, we did co-designing with the victim survivors group, but we didn't actually get them involved in co-production. So that's something that was missing from the last project. So yeah, it's really about how do we engage with them? How do we let them lead the whole project? I think that was one of the main concern or question that I had. Yeah, so yeah, I'm sorry, I don't really have the answer to your question, Naui, but yeah, I think we just need to have a lot of more conversation and more dialogue around this.
Yeah, this came up last week when I was doing some work on consumer engagement with ECRs who are involved in the Women's Health Research Translation Network. And it was sort of like, how do you, without a repository of your own networks, how, as an ECR or an EMCR, how do you describe that the research participants have been involved from the outset when you haven't really had the scores on the doors to say that they have, you know, so for example, when you join a research team, you can access interviews that have previously been done and you can use that as a platform to launch off of and say that in-depth qualitative interviews, our participants said that they needed X, Y, Z. And so you use that as your basis for your research idea. And so I think that the fundamental point to take away from that for ECRs is to find a team. And that is certainly the advice that Health Translation SA puts out, is to build, be the right person in the right team, right now. And that's, I think, something that everyone here could probably remember, that we often operate in silos, but we really should be operating more as research teams, I think, and drawing on other projects to substantiate the project we're putting forward. And, like Health Translation SA, they have a repository of consumers that you can contact and speak to. There's a little bit of debate over whether they're truly like, grassroots, consumers, because they've become like professionalized in a particular way, trained to be a consumer, somehow tainting that authenticity. But yeah, I think there are different steps that you can take to have the end user involved at their research design stage, and be thinking about that now. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the idea of having more conversations, I do feel like it's something that's, we're on the edge of it, so we just need to keep trying to figure out the way forward almost. And in that, while the process itself is constantly changing and constantly there is a question there for you, Belle. Does South Australia have a Health Consumers Association? Oh, there you go, you got it.
Yeah, I just saw that. I'm impressed by my input on the chat today, because usually I'm so rubbish on the chat. I just wanted to put that out there, that usually I can't keep up with the chat, but I'm doing okay today. Thank you for knowing that about me, Caitlin. I think, and I don't know, I think there's one I know there's one in New South Wales, isn't there? But I'm not sure about South Australia.
We might have time for one quick question, if anyone has anything else they want to add before we wrap up. But if not...
Is there a subgroup of TASA that is about consumer engagement? I'm not actually overly involved in terms of special interest groups, or, I know there's an applied sociology one, but is there? I'm
not sure if there's one specifically on, like, if there is a thematic group or not. I was going to say there is an applied sociology one, which I'm guessing would touch on that, but I'm not sure of the specifics of it. But something to consider in terms of subgroups and the content we have in them. Monica has a question around tips on venturing into industry, and I guess potentially approaching industry as a PhD student specifically, and if you have any tips for that.
Do you, Ellen?
Oh, I haven't got sound, Ellen. Sorry.
Sorry.
There we go.
Yeah.
That's okay.
I think we see a lot of industry-funded PhDs and things like that, and a lot of internship opportunities for PhD students at Monash. I don't know whether that's actually happening there, but yeah, I don't think I had any. Well, I used to work in diplomatic sector, so I had kind of personal connections, which was really helpful, but I'm not sure. Belle, did you work with the industry while you're doing PhD?
No, I definitely didn't work with the industry. The industry, like, what is industry is still quite hazy, isn't it? Like, I hear the word industry and think that's to be completely avoided, because I think of alcohol industry straight away. And so there is no way that I would align with the alcohol industry. But if we're talking about, industry as being, women's health organizations or the Cancer Council, then yes, we've done a lot of work with industry. But I know that there are lots of webinars that are available on, certainly through universities. So like, you would look to your own institution first for this, on industry outcomes from your research or industry funding, and they would give you clues on where you would be able to go in terms of if you wanted to make the switch from academia into the policy space or the industry space. My background is in health promotion, so I, which I became pretty jaded with straight after finishing the degree, and moved on to sociology, which I think a lot of people here are sort of wholly converted that sociology is where it's at. But I think, so you could you could during the PhD certainly offer to do, you know, volunteer work, or like I said, offer to do a presentation on your research and see how industry receives it, and then forge those networks and partnerships from that. I've never done a talk at a conference or at a professional group meeting that hasn't resulted in some kind of connection afterwards. That I think it's deeply valuable. Yeah.
Just do it, as Ellen said earlier. Just do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we've just hit time for the webinar or for the panel, but I just wanted to say thank you to both of our panelists for very insightful and fruitful conversation. I think this is something I find my brain thinking about throughout the day. So it's very good to hear your insights. And thanks to everyone else who joined us today. And this is going to be up on the TASA YouTube. So you can pass it on to other members who might have missed it and catch up or rewatch if you want to be inspired for how you can break out of the bubble yourself, I suppose. But yeah, thank you so much to everyone and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.